Hello, everyone. It's Pittsburgh Pat again with Ryan Doyle of the Verdigris Table. How are you, Ryan?
What's happening? How you
Everything's
doing?
good. Yeah, it's great. Great day. So we got the Monster Manual last night, the brandy
Hmm.
new Monster Manual. So anyway, if you don't know this channel, we're talking about D&D stuff because that's what we do. Hey, look, it's part of Europe. But anyway, there's a mind flayer on the cover, and this stylized art in here is really amazing. Like you know, it's worth getting it. And it's at game shops only, D&D Beyond, for the next 2 weeks. So we were in the game store and playing our weekly Tuesday night D&D game, and what fun it was. And I think almost everyone at the table bought a copy of the Monster Manual last night.
Yeah, which is funny because
Mm.
yeah, it's mostly players. Almost everyone has run D&D. I gotta bully Mike into DMing a session. Um,
Yeah, he's ready,
but
I think. I think he
God,
wants to do a one shot. So we'll get him
yeah,
do a one shot.
he's been ready. The
Mhm. Oh, I mean, like,
yeah,
we know he has the tools. I think he just needs the confidence.
yeah, and sometimes you just need a little shove, a little push.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think you and I were the only ones that bought the DMG. Everyone bought the Player's Handbook. I think we were the only ones that bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, but everybody bought the Monster Manual. People love
Hmm.
monsters.
Yeah, there's some great classic monsters in there. So speaking of monsters, we were fighting hags, in a sea hags, and so we were trying to
Hmm.
figure out what are they? Are they fae? Are they monstrosities? What did we come up with anyway on this?
Hags are fae,
Hags or fae?
and sea hags are underwater fae, which
Right.
is weird. And they've been here. They've been in at least in my headcanon, at least these particular hags have been on the material plane for a long time.
Right. We were talking about we're going through the Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So for those who are tuning in and for the first time, and yeah, so we were trying to figure out so that the hags have some kind of understanding with the Fey world, or
Hmm.
is that what it is? Or the Fey have dealings with the abyssal plane or something like that, or they have some kind
There,
of truce or something.
there's an agreement, and that's like old, I want to say Celtic folklore or something, but there's
Hmm.
some sort of like arrangement between the fair folk and the hell, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not partners, they're not allies. They just have some sort of like armistice. There's some ancient agreement that they made a deal a long time ago to not get in each other's way.
Right, right. And there's this old what was it, Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode where they were the Dominion has invaded the Alpha Quadrant, and so the Cardassians, the Bajorans, the Federation, you think the Klingons, they're all trying to fight off this threat from like the Gamma Quadrant, I guess. And if I'm getting that right. And but the Romulans are still sitting it out. And
Hmm.
so two of the Federation officers are trying to role play and say, like, what are you going to say to the Romulans to kind of like try to bring them into the fight? And one of them, the captain's like, well, they're invading they're crossing your borders, they're flagrantly like disregarding your territory. And the argument the first officer says is like something like, oh, so the Dominion is crossing my back, they're running through my backyard to give the Federation a bloody nose. Why would I care about that? And so that's kind of what came to mind last night when you were talking about the Fae and the infernal regions, like if they're if they're messing with the material plane, what do we ultimately care? It's like it's not on us, maybe.
Yeah, and we went deep with it for a couple because like there's a couple perspectives. There's someone who's trying to essentially get back to the Fey realms.
Yeah, that's our
There's
druid. She's
mhm,
yeah. That's
who has been plucked from the Dolmenwood campaign, which I love.
I love that too.
Uh, so some sort of like the kind of prototypical princess locked away in a tower somewhere for ages who has been set free from her, overprotective, overbearing father who happens to be a fairy lord of winter.
Yeah, now she's
Um,
princess like Princess Leia out there kicking butt, you know. Yeah.
hmm And there's a paladin with sort of complex backstory reasons for trying to just navigate the forces of good and evil, essentially. And the monk had captured one of the sea hags, essentially. So you're interviewing her. So,
Mhm.
like, you're getting this information filtered through an evil, crazy, semi-inscrutable being. So there was a lot of layers of interpretation going on, which
Yeah, we were
was a lot of
interrog
fun.
yeah,
I love stuff like that. It's like,
we're interrogating the hags, so that's where we're getting this background, and then we're kind of our characters are dealing with it, and then the players are adding their layer on top of what they know about like the history and folklore of D&D. And so, but Patrick the Paladin, there's two Patricks at the table. So Patrick the Paladin and I play a rogue. Um, his paladin, he really does a great job, I think, of this is what my character would do, you know.
mm,
Not like here's what I want to do as a player necessarily, but like the motivations of my paladin are, and he talks about his oath, and he doesn't even give us all of the reasoning. A lot of times he knows his character, and I think that's great. I think it's good that he doesn't like have to explain his backstory for, an hour, because there's those kinds of players as well, where and that can be fun. But like there's, we talk on this channel about different types of ways to run a campaign, advice for DMs, but also for new players or experienced players. And we talk about different types of scenarios. And one scenario is, players who really get into their backstory. You know,
mm.
there's that joke about the player who comes with a level one wizard who has like 5 hit points, and they spend like, you know, an hour and a half describing their backstory, and then they die in the first combat. So it's like, but that's that storytelling element is a lot of fun in character creation and character development. And that's one of the things that I find fun about D&D is that if you want, it can follow the track of like a novel or a short story where the characters actually change and evolve over time, and are motivated by what they're originally motivated by, but then maybe come to a different understanding of who and what they are, what their motivations are.
Absolutely. There's a very valuable soft skill that most dungeon masters learn through hard knocks, if not whatever research. Uh, but it is true on the player side too, and it's about providing the right amount of information, like the pertinent information without losing your audience. And again, on the dungeon master side, that's very clear when like if you're paying attention to your table, you see you're losing your players, you've gone too deep into the lore, or you haven't provided enough context. They don't understand something. So I'm constantly monitoring that as a dungeon master. And in fact,
Mm,
yesterday there was a couple times where it's like, your character knows this. You may have forgotten because it happened months ago.
mm.
Because like I am trying to like weave a mystery and give you guys the satisfaction of like connecting dots and stuff. But there's also like, yeah, you heard that. But that was in, fall of 2024. So Pat might not remember it, but the Rogue, it was a week ago for them. So their bells would be ringing. And again, I will pursue the rabbit hole. Like we got to like, all right, so Fae don't have souls, but what does that mean for like necromancy on a Fae creature? Like, can they be undead?
Yeah.
There's different qualities of undeath. We got like deep down the rabbit hole, and I'll like go there with the players if there's interest. But if I just like describe for 25 minutes the ancient pact between the Fae and the Nine Hells and how the Abyss respects that because of some thing that happened millennia ago during the Blood War, no one's going to be paying attention by the time I'm done. So it's about
But that,
gauging
but
constantly what's up.
yeah, and that was a fun conversation. I mean,
Hmm.
all six of us at the table got a chance to chime in on what we thought about um, Fey Undead and how that would work, you know. And so one of the ideas that I don't know if it was fully expressed, it was partially expressed at least, was that um, when a Fey becomes undead, there's kind of like a corruption of the body, you know, a decay or like, you know, that kind of like zombification thing going on. And maybe that is what separates whatever soul they have from, you know, um, from their body, if in fact, you know, like you were saying, like do Fays have souls? And you know, this is it's these kinds of yeah, we play kind of we play a pretty tight game, but we I feel like you create an environment where we're allowed to take 10 minutes and just like, you know, brainstorm and talk about tangential things
Mm, hmm.
that are outside the game. And I enjoy that social element of it. But then you're good at like roping everybody back in and getting back on course too after certain period of time. So that's also a dungeon master talent is being able to be the MC of events, you know, and it's kind of like, okay, here's the little sideshow, here's the, you know, the clown car and you know, the clowns coming out of the car at the circus. But the high wire act is really what the focus of this particular,
Mm.
you know, half hour segment is going to be. So spotlight back on that. And so I think you know, being able to orchestrate that and engineer that, that's a big deal. So,
That's good to hear. Thank you for saying that, because especially like yesterday, it was a very, you guys were at a crossroads. It's like,
mhm.
are we going to fortify this position and take the onslaught, or I forget whose idea was it originally. Are we gonna like Sun Tzu this thing? We know that the forces are coming, so we're gonna rope a dope and go to their house while they're up here.
Yeah,
Um,
it was either Craig or
and
Mike. I think it might have been Mike that first mentioned it. Yeah. The
yeah, and that was last week, and that's kind of where we like left things. And so the beginning of this session, I mean, there was some like, there was the interrogation with there was the social scene with the sea hag, but there was like you guys were debating what to do, and like I still have this instinct as the dungeon master to like hit the gas, drive the action, create dramatic tension or whatever. And that's super useful a lot of the time. But I've been like working on being okay taking that step back, especially in those situations where like you guys needed to decide between you. And I didn't want to influence that decision overtly. I wanted to give you the information you needed that your characters would have to make the choice. But I don't have skin in the game, honestly. I'm ready to run the assault on Firewatch Island. I'm ready to run the the shipwreck where the rift is. I don't want to give too much away because you guys didn't see all of that yet.
right.
But that's my job as a dungeon master is to be ready. Like this is the branches on this path. I know what's happening in both of them. I am less interested in creating a plot so much as situations so that plot can unfold. And sometimes that's challenging because we spent, I don't know, 45 minutes discussing how we were going to play the game,
Right.
but that's still playing the game. Like that's
Yeah.
still perfectly valid and the thing that like should happen. Like it's kind of the good stuff of D&D.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, you know, when I came into this session, I thought we were decided. I thought that at the end of last week, we had decided we were going to sidestep the waves of zombies that were supposed to return to the island at dusk, and we were going to dive on the shipwreck. So basically, what's happened for those who have been following the plot, um, we were on an island. We've discovered like they're kind of like the remains of an assault of undead that had hit this island, and it's one of those they come at night mostly. They mostly come at night kind of thing. And we find some prisoners who confirm that. We find a talking seagull that confirms this. We find a journal. You know, we have some indications that like when sundown comes, it's going to get bad. There's going to be potentially a lot of, you know, we're thinking maybe 30, 50. We're just throwing numbers out there. uh creatures that are going to come, and there's, five of us, potentially like eight of us with some NPCs that were going to be thrown in there, which
Hmm.
is, and then which I want to get back to, but yeah, so in terms of the plot, we decided, well, there's an artifact we've heard about sessions ago that's on a ship. And now we know that ship has sunk, and we found this kind of underwater diving kit, and from a character, a dead NPC called Archaeus. I found Archaeus is familiar, which is the talking bird, and that's kind of like, hey, well, let's do what Archaeus was going to do and dive the shipwreck, so with his gear. And so we were going to do, so that's what I thought we were going to do at the beginning of the session, but Patrick wasn't at the last session. So he kind
Mm.
of needed to get up to speed on that. And I think he needed to be on board with that. And so we had incapacitated one of the two sea hags we had fought in the last mission, and one got away. And he used a really cool locate spell on her, which is, it's something else I want to talk about. But yeah, the interrogation took much longer than I thought it would. I thought we were going to go like just go. And so as a player, and I think as a DM, it's important to have patience at the table, and also, have a resilience, a mental resilience, and be able to be ready for the fact that um, there are six minds at the table, and
Hmm.
it's important to let everybody have, you know, their share of like the party dynamic, unless you appoint a leader. I mean, there's other campaigns I've played in where like there is kind of like a party leader, and there's more of like a almost a hierarchical, like military maybe formation kind of going on. And then it's like, things are assigned, and you're the rogue, you climb over that fence. You're the paladin, you go up and knock on the door. You're, this, that, the other thing. And so but that's not the way we're playing. We're kind of like uh kind of more free form, where everybody throws their ideas in. It's more of a democratic process. But doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of different ways to play this game.
Yes. At this particular table, yesterday I was having a conversation and I described this as like the Ship of Theseus campaign over the years because like every there's one player who's been there the whole time. Every other seat has had at least somebody else in it, if not two other people in it. So, and we're in this environment, we're playing at our friendly local neighborhood game shop. It's a thriving, growing communal space. It's a coffee shop now. It's like board game night. There's a very successful Blood on the Clock Tower game.
There was another D&D
And
group last night. I think I saw them bringing in
yeah,
a bunch of like terrain and buildings and things like that.
yeah, there's some D&D going on, and there's like people that we know, right? And coming and going and walking past the table, and there's music playing and whatever. So it's a much more environment that enforces like a casual style of play. So certain choices that I would make in my online game or like at my dining room table, it's just the environment enforces a different style of play, which I have learned to embrace instead of struggling with trying to correct for. Like it's actually, I enjoy the differences now. Like I enjoy it for what it is. And that has created a scenario where like players come and go either someone was sick last week or like somebody moved. This new guy joined. So there is a very open-ended conversation about like what is this game that we're playing, right? Because everyone has a version of D&D in their brain.
Mhm.
We're lucky in the sense that a lot of us sitting at the table have been playing D&D for a while. So we bring a lot of like tools and assets, but also like a set of assumptions and
Mhm.
experiences.
Mhm.
So there is this like feeling out each other point. And you guys are good at doing that, right? Like you were saying earlier, Patrick expresses this is what my character would do because of how he sees the world. I, the player, understand that I'm not saying it's my way or the highway. I am just giving you the information that you need to know where my character's coming from, but I'm here to participate in this democratic conversation to figure out what direction we're going in next. And he wasn't there, and the bard joined
Hmm.
last week. So I was like, all right, in other games, maybe I would invent an elaborate set of reasons. And I had one the week earlier because the bard was maybe coming 2 weeks ago, and like I had a very, I spent the time to figure out, all right, how this is how we insert him in the story in like a narratively satisfying way.
Hmm.
And then someone's not there and someone's there. It's just like, hey, look, as long as everyone's cool with it, like we're making a joke out of it, and we're just gonna hit the ground running and keep moving. We're not gonna put focus on the fact that like the paladin is now a totally different person, and we're playing. Like it doesn't
Right,
have to be the big thing.
right. Yep, that's true. And that's important, to have that kind of mechanic. Like, what are we going to do when somebody's not present? Because it's going to happen. So we're going to
Mm.
like play that character as an NPC. Somebody at the table is going to play that character, or are we just going to like just have that person like off doing something like crafting, like we were going to say, like he was trying to make holy water or something like that, and not actively have him participate in the session, which is what we ended up doing last week, which is one of the easier ways to do it. But
Hmm.
so we talk a lot about nuts and bolts stuff in this conversation because we're learning the new 2025 rules, and we did get the new monster manual last night. So there are some new things in there that we could have used. We didn't end up doing that. There were three NPCs, and you were talking about the fact that there are now what are called toughs. There were two
Mm.
toughs. So maybe we should talk about that for a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I was
Or
I don't
yeah,
I
yeah. It was like
we
I
like
think they're
shiny new toys.
so if you have a monster manual, it's on page 307, and yeah, their stat block is like it's it's not just monsters in here, right? So it's NPCs too. So you know people that you might encounter or people that might actually fight alongside you, right? So a tough is a bodyguard, a belligerent, a laborer. Toughs rely on physical strength to intimidate foes. They might be brawny criminals, rowdy tavern goers, seasoned workers, or anyone who uses their muscle to get what they want. And then there's a nice little stat block for that. And it's nice to have these kinds of things because not every dungeon master is gonna pre-generate every NPC before the game starts. And it's nice to have stat blocks you can look at on the fly. And and it's cool. I think it's cool that I've paged through the monster manual a little bit last night, a little bit this morning. The art is amazing, I have to
Mm.
say. Uh,
Mm.
and from what I've seen, there's a lot of great classic monsters in here. There's a lot of dragons. There's a lot
Hmm.
of great art for dragons. And there's but yeah, there's some stuff here that I didn't really expect, and that was one of them. Toughs. And then one of them, the other NPC was going to be an acolyte, right? But we couldn't find an acolyte. So we found it under priests, right?
Yeah, there's
So,
like tiers of priests now, which I like. It seems like they've added more like steps and shadings to a lot of creatures actually. Not
mhm.
just NPCs, but like, there's a goblin. I forget the terminology already, but they've created a little more differentiation. So it's like maybe I want a CR one half thing, maybe I want a CR2 thing. I have them at easy reach now. I don't have to build them myself or completely reskin something. And reskinning is a thing I'm a huge fan of that I feel like is almost like a dirty secret or like people don't talk about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I thought those NPCs the door had been closed on them. And again, the paladin comes back after a week, catch him up, and he's like, "Wait, there's some diseased person." Like my character would go, like, "Fix that." So he goes
Yeah.
back, literally reopens that door, and I'm like, "Okay, cool. Like you have done, you've gone above and beyond. These guys will stand with you if that's what you want." And I'm a big fan of handing the player the stat blocks. I have enough things to run, first of all. Second of all, it's cool to be like, all right, now you're two PCs. Like
Hmm.
here's your little hireling minion partner, whatever the case may be. And it's like not that we need to do it at this table so much, but it's actually like my like secret backdoor like dungeon master training wheels thing where it's like, all right, now you're running a monster stat block. How does this feel? This is what all this
Yeah.
looks like.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm definitely taking this to after school today to show the kids. I mean, we're gonna like, use that at least. I mean, I only have one book and there's at least three groups running, but at least show them the art, get them inspired to introduce different things into their campaigns and maybe try to teach them a little bit about how to read a stat block. Um, it's that's not intuitive. Like you don't look at a stat block and just go, oh, that's it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what I tend to do is give them a little, try to have them focus on a new player, focus on, you know, AC to hit and like what options they have for like attacks. And then everything else in that stat block we can talk about later. But those are kind of like the hitting points, the first how are you going to run this thing in combat and then maybe a social monster scenario as well, so using like charisma, using like you know uh spells that charm characters, things like that, so or something that has a frightening presence. We've had that, so we've been dealing with that. When we did actually we actually get to the point where we dove on the shipwreck. We entered some kind of aura or field where we all had to make charisma saving throw to see if we were going to be frightened. So that was, another, or no, we were vulnerable to necrotic damage, I think. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, it was a wave of cold damage, and then it was two saves, it's like, hey, it's
Yeah,
going down now.
it's
You're entering
serious.
boss territory, and like you've already like you're deep underwater. You've already like you're pressurized and breathing water and have swim speeds. All this like magical equipment has gotten you where you need to be, and you enter this like d dome, right? We're dealing in three dimensions now of like unhallowed space. And yeah, it was a Constitution save to deal with cold damage,
Right.
and then it was a Charisma save to deal with being vulnerable or not to necrotic damage, which is interesting because the fight that you just had, no one was dishing out necrotic damage. Boom, boom, boom.
There's something
Um,
else down here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was gonna if things had timed out differently, I would have liked to like leave that cliffhanger, but it was just
Mm,
like
it was time. It
wait,
was getting towards
it was
10
time.
o'clock. It was
Yeah,
the store was closing.
if I had 10 more minutes, we would have ended on a which I like ending on conclusions too sometimes because that lets you like spring that to start a session. But I like a good cliffhanger where it's just like, oh man, I like to leave the players like with an open loop that they're going to think about for the rest of the week so that D&D is top of mind and they can't wait to get back.
Yeah, and it facilitates or it creates an opportunity to for players to talk to each other in the downtime
Hmm.
and say, "Hey, you know what? I had a thought on how to approach this situation when we resume." And that's, great for the social element of it to get people outside of the game talking to each other. Yeah, so the locate object spell that Patrick used, that was kind of cool. So we ended up looking up the spell, and I don't know, was it Patrick's the only character, his paladin is the only character that's using a 2014 stat block. The rest of us are using 2024 stat blocks. So he started to read the locate object spell, but he was reading it off his phone and he was reading it off of D&D Beyond. And by the time I got to the page in the player's handbook, where the new 2024 player's handbook, where it said locate object, he was halfway through the reading of the spell. And it was, by the time I got to it, it was verbatim. So I think maybe he was under the assumption he was reading the 2014 spell, but it was the 2024 rules. So I don't know how that's changed, but it's pretty cool. So last week we fought two sea hags. One of them we distracted by throwing a valuable object at it, a silver um, candelabra, which you called the Candelabra of Fate, which I thought was
Yeah, that was,
funny.
I think, clearly a joke, but I do like to leave a little mystery. Like, you don't know.
I
You
love
open
that
the bag,
joke.
it was there, she wanted it, and
Just
then
put
the monk just like threw it as a distraction,
yeah.
which served him well. Was like, you didn't
Yeah,
cast
I mean
Identify or anything.
it changed the dynamic, it changed the calculus of that encounter
Mm,
entirely. Once it was like by the time it got to be five against or four against one as opposed to four against two, I mean that's a real like force, divider, not multiplier. But it changed the equation of the force equation. But yeah, locate objects. So this hag had run away with this candelabra of fate, and he put the locus on it. So he does a divination spell to locate this object, and it says you can name an object that's familiar to you. So all he needed was like a description of it or a look at it, I guess. And you can locate that object up to 1,000 feet away. And if it's moving, you can tell which way it's moving. That's pretty wild. Um,
yeah, it's good. 1,000 feet, you have to be kind of close in D&D terms. Like if it's like miles away, you won't see it. But if it's
right.
within 1,000 feet, so it's like it's in this village,
But
right? And
then
maybe we
the
have to walk around the village a little bit, but
yeah, so you can't just like be in orbit and then like, locate it from, above like that. But the last paragraph is really interesting. It says the spell can't locate an object if any thickness of lead blocks a direct path between you and the object. No
mm.
explanation. Really interesting though. So I was joking that it was like a magical Geiger counter or something, like something that works on some kind of level of radiation or something. I don't know. Why is it lead and why is it any thickness of lead? There's a couple other places where that comes up in D&D though.
Yeah, there's a lot of stipulations on, I guess, divination in general. Because there's a lot of things like you can't detect it through like 1 foot of stone or 1 inch of, or no, I think it's like a foot of wood and an inch of stone, and then like any amount
Metal.
of lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's, ways to shield. I guess wizards are shielding, objects from their enemies or whatever. But this
Yeah, I
hag is in a
mean,
grotto somewhere. She doesn't have any lead unless it's in the water.
yeah. That makes sense though that, you would have to if you had a horde, if you were dragging in a horde of like magical objects, you would want to like shield them somehow. You
Mhm.
wouldn't want just everybody to know like where you're, you know, how to, well, it's divination, it'd be like divining for water or something, like finding a resource, so whatever magical means by which you were going to do that, which actually
And
to me is, yeah.
the radiation metaphor is like pretty apt. And it
Mm.
just shows like, oh, it feels like that's an artifact of, not that we're done with any of these concerns, but like the Cold War era, like this is a game created in the 70s where like nuclear
Mm.
radiation was kind of top of mind. These guys, I'm sure, grew up, doing drills where they hid under their desks in case the Reds push the button or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
I didn't, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. That's a
I
good
didn't
point.
until you just said that. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
interesting. I didn't think about that last night, but yeah, there's a clear parallel there. And maybe that's where it comes from.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Uh, so yeah, so that was cool. And then what was the one, at one point somebody said, oh, I know what it was. We took one of the scrolls we'd found, which was Speak with Animals, and we talked to the seabird again, Virgil,
Mm.
the half-blind seagull. And at one point somebody said, I cast exposition. And so we were doing like I love that. So sometimes the DM through NPCs can tell you a lot about the story so far or you know, the history of what's going on in the island. And yeah, that's pretty funny. I don't know that I've ever heard it expressed that way, but I'm definitely going to use that. I cast exposition. And then you talk for 5 minutes about what the characters need to know in order to get the situation moving again. But uh one of the things that's in the new player's handbook, and only for a paragraph or two, is underwater combat. So we
Mm,
got to the point where we're fighting underwater, and it's pretty early in the book. It's like on page 27. But basically, what it says is that, I mean, as far as mechanically, ranged objects are, so it says impeded weapons, right? If you're fighting underwater, if you don't have a swim speed, like if your stat block specifically says you don't have a swim speed, then you have disadvantage on all attack rolls except if your weapon uses piercing damage. I thought that was
mm.
interesting, you know? So you can sit there in the water and, like you mentioned, poke a trident at somebody, or even a short sword uses piercing damage, and uh and you get you get you're not at disadvantage, except if it's a ranged weapon, because a lot of ranged
Mm.
weapons use piercing damage, short bows and that sort of thing. And it says here, a ranged attack roll with a weapon underwater automatically misses a target beyond the weapon's normal range, and the attack roll has disadvantage against the target within normal range. So unless we invent
Yeah,
the spear gun or something, like you're not gonna
the
like,
resist.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if this is a dream I had or this is the 2014 rules now, because there's too many systems rattling around in my head already.
Mm,
And now there's like we're in this like quantum state between two versions of D&D 5e.
right.
But I believe it used to be that crossbows worked underwater.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, you
couldn't
were
they couldn't
actually
go
gonna give that to me.
beyond.
Hmm.
Yeah, they couldn't go beyond their range. Well, because yeah, you had a short bow, and you guys have spent quite a bit of time preparing for this eventuality,
Right.
right? You've done your homework here, and like again, I try to be pretty generous with differentiating what your character would know, which you have forgotten, right? Like, so your character in game has spent a lot of time preparing for underwater combat and scenarios, and that's come up a couple times. So they would know, in this case, if, which is untrue, a crossbow was a better option than a short bow. And they're doing the same, generally, you could squint and they're doing the same thing
Mm.
from the game level. But yeah, that is no longer the case. Ranged weapons don't work the same underwater, period. And I like the fact like it's about resistance, right? Like if you ever had the dream where you're trying to run underwater or like punch someone and it feels like you're underwater. It's just there's that much more friction in the water that like swing a sword, it's just it doesn't work the same.
Right. Right. And the other thing was resistance to fire damage as well, because it's underwater.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I had a moment there where I won't call it panic, but it was like I was perplexed. I was looking at my weapons, on in the app, in the D&D Beyond app, and I'm looking at the weapons chart, and I'm like, this sucks. I got nothing here. So, but it did, but it made me. That's why I'm glad you did. We decided not to use the crossbow rules, because it made me look at my character differently and see what resources the character had. So instead of trying to optimize for the situation and do what I would do normally on land, I had to figure out other things to do. And that was interesting. So I started doing the rogue thing where you dart in, dart out, which I haven't really done much in combat on land, in order to try, optimally with a rogue, you're trying to get like sneak attack damage, because at level 8, you get to roll like 4d6, extra. And you're trying to get advantage on your attacks, because then if you get if you crit, then you get to do that twice, and that can add up to be a lot of damage. In fact, at one point, one of my attacks did 41 damage, and
Yeah, you smoked a couple of
yeah,
these zombie pirates.
you get lucky like that, and you get some like nice high damage rolls. It can be a game changer. So, but at range, what I was trying to do was, I would, because it's at a few points during the combat, I would have been at disadvantage if I tried to do something once because I was frightened, um,
Mm.
and other times because, the ranged weapons would have been at disadvantage. So I cast Acid Splash, which is not an attack spell. It's not an attack roll. It's a spell attack. It's the enemy has to make a saving throw. So you can bypass disadvantage by doing those kinds of things. And I think
Hmm.
that's an interesting way. So I had that cantrip sitting there, never only used it a couple times. And so this was an instance where I was able to use it. And so that gave it a little bit of flavor. And then also um for my bonus actions, instead of doing something where you're like, you know, Vex Nick kind of thing where you're doing two attacks, using the bonus action. And at one point, the paladin Patrick said he was low on hit points, so I used a Ledger Demand mage hand in order to pop a potion and kind of just let it leak into the water right in front of his mouth so that he could sip that and get his 2d4 plus 2. So that was one way. And then the other way I did a Ledger Demand, a bonus action with the Ledger Demand mage hand was there was a kind of what I thought was a boss creature in this fight, and he had a mask on, some kind of like
Mm.
block of wood with two holes cut out of it. And I was going to do the old like um, Three Stooges kind of like pull the mask away, snap it back. And you're like, no, there's no elastic bands in. It's too anachronistic. So I just basically,
I agonized over that decision. I was like, this, I like was very close to rule of cooling that. I was like, no, it's not,
yeah,
there's no elastic band, but there's other
yeah,
ways to get there, and you
yeah.
got there.
So I just like moved it so that he was blinded for a round and moved the eye holes away from his eyes. And and that worked. And so, I think it's like that whole thing, like, necessity is the mother of invention, or scarcity, creates creativity. I don't know what the cliche is there. But not doing your normal thing and having to figure out other ways to do things can add a lot of fun and color to a scenario. So
Yes,
don't despair.
a lot of dungeon masters struggle with keeping combat interesting, especially at higher levels where there's just like way more branches on the decision tree for players to make. They're putting up bigger numbers, but it combat takes longer, and the players in a lot of cases have figured out the best thing to do and have done it a bunch of times already. So
Hmm.
changing the conditions, either environmentally, right? So like underwater is a great example of that, but like cover situations, terrain differences, traps on the field,
Three
is one.
dimensions,
Hmm.
which is hard
Hmm.
to
Yeah, because you guys were
represent a lot of times, but that's but especially on a map on a two-dimensional surface. But
yes, yes, we had a
we
challenge
we
spatially
yeah.
having this fight because you guys were floating above, coming down, but there were yeah, the three-dimensional fight is tricksy. But the other thing you can do is change the like the wind conditions almost, or like keeping in mind that the monsters maybe don't want to just stand there and fight until they're dead, right?
Right.
So like the last fight where the hag just is like whoop, grabbed it, ran when she figured out she was outnumbered. The other one eventually ran when she was bloodied enough. Like different kinds of win conditions. Like the object isn't just get to zero through attrition. There's other ways to win a fight
Sure.
or end a fight. Yeah.
Or use non-lethal damage to incapacitate, or trips, or like I always like having things like Tasha's Hideous Laughter is a fun one, something you can do to make somebody fall prone. So if they're running away and you don't want them to get away, you can make them fall prone. Actually, now I think there's I think it's a rogue. There's like a special ability with rogues where you can trip somebody in combat. I think you
You
you use
I think
a
you're at the level now where you
yeah.
can like trade your sneak attack damage, which
Yes.
is a tricky bargain to make a lot of the time. But you
Hmm.
can do other things with sneak attack now, which I like that kind of game design where you have your it plugs right into like the core resource currency of
Hmm.
your character, and there's different ways to spend that now.
I think if I remember correctly, it's you can trade a die. So like if you're at a higher level and you have 4d6 um sneak attack damage, you can trade one of the dice. So
Mm.
you can say, I'll do 3 and damage him, 1 I'll use to trip this guy. If I'm remembering that correctly. I haven't used
That
that mechanic yet.
that feels right. Well, it's new. I mean, it's new to
Yeah.
one, it's new to everybody, but two, it's new to you
Mhm.
because it doesn't. That's not a level 3 ability. That's a level, I think,
No.
7 or 8 comes
Yeah.
online.
Hmm.
And it's the kind of thing where like it's very situational, and that's why you want to create different kinds of situations because there's plenty
Right.
of fights where big number good, burn this thing down, get it to 0 as fast as possible. But she's getting away, right?
Yeah.
Is always a very,
Yeah.
it's a state change in a fight, and now it's like, oh, like I if I shoot her in the back, she's gonna die, and I want to talk to her. She knows things. And I will say
Exactly.
one cool thing that came out of the new monster manual is I am I'm going to say that I'm disappointed that there are not more of them already. But the Sea Hag had a table of just like things that they're doing. I forget what the table title was, but I rolled on this like D6 table,
Hmm.
and this particular Sea Hag like prophesizes doom. I was like, ah, cool. And that would like whoop, totally colored her and that interaction, and it was just I had a ton of fun with it, and
It
like
was
I don't know,
fun.
maybe it was fun. It was
It
really
was
fun,
fun.
and
Like
that is the
anything that
kind of
she
like
would give
color.
us in her exposition, she would say, and then you will meet your
Yeah,
doom. Like
yes.
so. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm looking up. It's Cunning Strike is the ability we were talking about, and it's page 130 in the free rules. But yeah, you can trade a D. You can trade one of your sneak attack damage dice for trip or poison or withdrawal. So that's pretty cool.
Ooh, poison is a. I forgot that poison was on that list. Poison's a
Yeah,
good one.
that's a DC Constitution saving throw of 15 and uh, failed save, they get poisoned for a minute. And at the end of each of the turns, they have to repeat. They can try to save again. Um, the trip is if the target's at least large or smaller. You can't do anything over the size of large. It's a DC 15 dex save. And if they fail, then they fall prone. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. And then the withdrawal
Yeah.
is like you can, withdraw. But yeah, so it's nice to have those kinds of options. Those that reminds me, I mean, in the original 2014 D&D 5e rules, it seemed like sorcerers had a lot of options like that, where they could use their sorcery points for various things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like pretty neat trade-off. I think there was a trade-off for the number of spells they had or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this is, I think somebody somewhere at the brainstorming table in my imagination said, hey, why don't we like give players more options with their stuff? And it seems like that's what the new 2024 rules have tried to do. So, yeah.
And so far so good. I mean, it does seem like you guys have more interesting choices to make, and that is what I I'm into and I'm looking for. It's not just like a lot of the discussion becomes like, what's the one optimal thing to do? And like, that's not fun for super long. That's fun in the white room figuring it out. But then when you're like, all right, this is the maximum amount of damage. This is the gameplay loop I'm going to do every time. Round one, I do this. Round two, I do this.
Yes.
Round three, it's over.
Yes.
That's fun a
I
couple times.
There's a guy in
But
Adventure League that does that. He just loves playing fighters and he loves having like the higher his levels are, the more attacks he gets, and he just does the same attack two, three, four times. And that's what tickles his brain. So like good for him. But I want something that like adds to the story. So that's what makes it interesting for me. That's not the way you have to play everything, but giving somebody an object and then seeing what they'll do with it creatively. So we were talking about this a little bit last night, which was the immovable rod and the
mm,
physics of the immovable rod. And we were having kind of debates about, you know, when you attach the rod to an object, it stays with the object. It doesn't stay with its location in space, right? So if you're, and we talked about like the way the the Earth like revolves around the sun and how it like, you know, wobbles in its orbit and all this other kind of stuff. It's real motion, and even the famous, YouTube or Science Channel um, graphic of that isn't as accurate. You know what I mean? It's not completely accurate either. It gives you a concept of like what that could look like
Yeah. So we think of the planets orbiting the sun. We never think about the sun
moving through
moving
the galaxy. Yeah,
around the center of the galaxy, which is also in motion.
right.
But yeah, it's like this like corkscrewing effect. So like yeah, in some it says I think it's the PHB now, it might be the DMG, but like somewhere in the rules now it says the rules are not physics. It's not quite a physics engine because like one way of looking at it, I click the button on the immovable rod and it just goes flying because it is staying in that point in space time and the planet's moving away from it.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it's
It's
not the balloon in the
relativistic
car.
physics, right? It's
Yes.
physics like you're traveling at 60 miles an hour and you throw a ball in the air. The ball doesn't like shoot out the back window. It has the
Hmm.
momentum of the car, so but the rod is immovable by name. So like what does that mean? And so, interpreting these rules for the situation and for your campaign, if you're the DM, or, making an argument to your DM, uh, if you're the player, you know, that's important. And I like to hear, so like that's the type of thing that I'll introduce in the classroom when I'm talking to kids about this is like, and they come up with some really interesting solutions, and so it's the type of thing where uh, for dive finding this immovable rod in a diving kit sort of gave me an idea that like you anchor it to the ship and then you take the rope and you throw the rope down and then you always have a way to get back to the ship. But that was
Mm.
like one possible use of this in our context. But there's so many, and there's so many great like, and we did a video about this time last year actually, about kind of somewhat common or uncommon low level magic items and how creatively you can use them. And so it's fun to throw those kinds of things into the mix and see what the players come up with, you know?
Exactly. There was a moment where like I thought you guys were going to use it because you take the rowboat out
Mhm.
to the deep water and then you're like, "All right, we're going to go diving." I dropped the anchor. I was like, "Well, the anchor on this little thing doesn't have enough rope to reach bottom.
Right.
What do you do?" And I was like, "They're going to use the immovable rod." And you were like, "Well, I have a shit ton more rope." So I tie that to the anchor and we drop that. And now we use that as like a belay line down to the bottom. So
Exactly.
it's much more controlled. We're much less likely to get lost on our way back up.
Mhm.
So like it's funny as the dungeon master, you really only build one side of the puzzle. And like most of the times where I've been like, this is the key to this lock, the players find a interesting and often better way of opening the lock. So like, yeah, just give them tools, create situations, and see what happens.
Yep. I think that's it. I think you just nailed it. That's one of the great things about being a DM is you don't have to have the whole thing figured out.
Hmm.
Just throw it down and see what happens. The players will inform the story. So, all right, it's been a great hour again. Always love these talks, and we'll keep this going as long as we can. Uh, but for now, we'll say goodbye. Thanks everybody for watching, and be sure to subscribe to this channel and to Ryan's Verdigris Table. He's got content. You publish a couple times a week now, don't you?
Yeah, there's a tiny hiatus. I
Hmm.
took it a couple weeks to get my head on straight. It's been a weird time on YouTube. All of the D&D YouTubers are talking about how D&D YouTube is dead, which is kind of a
Oh,
funny recursive loop. But like one, I don't believe that, but two, I'm just getting back to the roots. Like I'm doing more stuff like this, like just like collaborative, fun stuff, and I'm working on more like creative stuff. It's exhausting trying to follow the news and the hype cycle and all of that. And honestly, there are people who are better at doing it than I am. They want it more. So yeah, it's been a restructuring couple of weeks here at the verdigris table, but new cool stuff is in the pipeline already.
All
Yeah.
right, cool. All right, guys. Well, everybody out there, have a great day. Enjoy your games, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks everybody. And thanks, Pat. Appreciate you, man.
Without a doubt.